Welcome back to another edition of Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we've been having, 15-minute conversation prior to starting this recording about the topic at hand today and what did we want to jump into and what did we want to discuss. And I think Gary and I have both been doing a lot of introspection as of late. And I don't know if that's exactly going to be the title that I name this podcast ultimately, but I do think introspection is the very first stop on the journey to a whole lot of curious questions. And ultimately, if you are trying to come up with an answer to a problem or a situation in your life, it typically starts with that inward look.
Yeah, and if we're on a journey to be more curious and less judgmental, and if you're following this podcast at all, that's the journey that we're on, and we're trying to take people along with us, hopefully not by force. And that journey, any journey starts with self, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not you can't just go be curious in the world if you're not curious with respect to your own self.
Yeah. Well, and so when we say being curious about ourselves, to me, how I interpret that is, why do I act the way I do? Why do I respond the way I do? Why does that thing set me off? Or why does this thing feel so comfortable or so joy-filled, when to somebody else it just is silly or doesn't matter? And so why do we have the reactions, positive or negative, to things the way that we do?
We've talked before about nature, nurture, and choice. And we do get some things from our nature, but many things come from our nurture. And many, if we look back over our lives, we can look at certain things that have caused us to come up with a set of rules to live by, or a set of assumptions, or old ideas. And sometimes old ideas are good and they're valid, but I think, we would do well to look at our ideas, our old ideas from time to time, and see, are they serving us well? Are they serving the people around us well? And if they're not, then maybe we should question them in a bent of curiosity, right? And just say, hey, is this useful? Or is this putting me in fear or other situations? I think one of the things that I find myself doing sometimes is all of a sudden I'll be thinking to myself, why am I acting this way? Why am I doing this? And if I really sit with it, it oftentimes comes back to an old idea, something that I assume about the world or about myself, and that may or may not be useful. And if we are to grow, I think looking at those, being aware of them, doesn't mean you're going to fix anything, but being aware of it, I think you can sometimes hang out in those valleys for shorter periods of time, and or course correct or self-correct. We have all had situations where we go, why did I behave like that in that situation? Or what just happened here, right? And, part of it is old ideas that we sometimes don't even look at, that have just come out.
So very interesting timing that you bring up this phrase, old ideas, because I think I've shared with you, I've been going through this leadership course, and the lesson plan that I was working on today was about innovation. And innovation really being almost the juxtaposition to old ideas, right? And whether you're talking about your own way of behaving and thinking, or you're talking about the organizational constructs, if you are stuck and rooted in old ideas, you inherently are not innovating, and therefore you become stagnant, and stagnant things will often die. And so when we find ourselves stuck in old thoughts, old ideas, old ways of thinking, and that stagnation begins to come on, the innovation part is what's sometimes really hard to jumpstart, because it does take a lot of force to kind of kick yourself out of that rut of old thinking. And what made me curious about this particular lesson that I was going through today, it said most of the time innovation doesn't happen alone. Innovation happens amongst peers or friends or whatever, in a group. And there had been all these studies that had been done about these innovators, these famous innovators. When did the brilliance strike them? When did the lightning strike, so to speak? And it typically was in group settings, or when somebody was trying to debrief a problem with somebody else, and it's through working out the kinks of the problem that the new ideas come forward.
No question in my mind. And I often say the statement out loud, and how true it is we could debate, is that I think through and with other people. I don't think on my own. Now, if it's a self-reflection that I need to do, that's different. But if I'm trying to solve a problem out there, organizationally or with certain situations or physics or, whatever it is, technical, my goodness, getting a group of people together with different viewpoints of the same problem is absolutely the way to innovate, because what innovation is generally an assimilation, a bringing together, a coalition, a collaboration of different ideas that form a new idea. It's like the gift bag, right? It's wrapping paper and a bag together, so you don't have to do it separate. And it's those kinds of things that are the innovations that, really, I think the only way to make progress. It's hard for you, Einstein said, one of the great innovators, that you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that got you into the problem in the first place. So in order to get a different mind, it often takes a conversation, an open, curious conversation with another.
On the way over here, I was wrapping up a phone call with this young man who is the same age as my eldest daughter, and I just have to laugh because he's very wise beyond his years and somebody I've come to consider as a friend. Not that I can't be friends with my daughters, but definitely generational differences. And we were talking through a bunch of stuff, and he said, well, what's making you excited these days? And I was sharing some of the things, that were going on in my world, and I asked him the same question, and he said, I just have this sense that something big is brewing, and I want to position myself to be ready to move when the big thing happens, whatever that looks like. And he said, I feel very strongly that we're coming into a season of people learning to work together and to problem solve and to, have new approaches as they come together and collaborate on situations. And that made me excited to hear him say that out loud. And I will say that word collaboration is still one of my favorite words of all time. There is something magical and beautiful and mystical about it. But yes, when we have been stuck in a rut of old thinking, we realize there is a problem to solve, you bring in people to work with you, and together you come up with a new solution. That collaborative spirit is just so beautiful to me, and I think really is the answer to any major issue that we face as a society. That, rarely is one person going to have the answer to the problem, but man, when we start to put our heads together collectively and figure out how we can make a change in our world, starting with ourselves, I feel like the sky is the limit on that one.
It is, and if you're going to try to go for an innovation, if you're going to try to do something new, grabbing people from different sectors, different walks of life, different backgrounds is essential to that. Otherwise, you're just going to come up with the same patterns that you've had before. I mean, almost by definition. Very difficult for folks. I'm a product of that right now in the current company I'm in. It's how to deliver energy into new neighborhoods. And of course, we have to start with folks who are from the utility, from the current energy delivery systems. But what the person who put this team together did was he brought in some people who were from outside of that. My background as a double E is with Intel and semiconductors and lasers, not power electronics, not power delivery, not transmission, none of those parts of a utility way of thinking. And then we got somebody in from who comes out of the paper industry, and we got people who came out of finance. And what we did was we put those people together and said, okay, look, we want to start with a clean sheet of paper and rethink about how utilities could deliver energy in the future, especially in light of the new renewables and all those things. Quite frankly, I think it has worked really well with respect to the innovation part. And I think that those having people from different places, it's not that one person is more essential than the other or one is more important than the other. You have to have kind of the basis of how things work, but you also have somebody who is not tethered
Yeah.
to how those things work,
Yeah.
so that they can then collaborate and come up with something new.
Yeah. I was watching a TED Talk today that was tied to this class that I'm taking, and they were talking about this team that was trying to tackle these big global issues, one of them being child mortality rates. And so they had identified a particular location that had a very high child mortality rate, and they were realizing that it was a lack of one of the causes was not having the incubators in the hospitals that would serve as the warming stations for premature children, etc. And so the conversation went something like, well, we could ship over this $40,000 warming unit and it would be good for a year or two, but the moment that it breaks, it becomes utterly useless for the rest of time because they do not have the parts and they don't have the knowledge to fix it and all of these things. And so the innovation began around the fact that they've identified the problem and they've identified the solution, but the solution in its present packaging and its present construct was not going to be sufficient to meet the needs and to have that be a long-term solution to the problem. And so they began to rethink this incubator, and they were able to redesign it using car parts, because in that region of the world there was lots of abandoned cars or leftover cars, and so the heating element was the headlamps. The monitor the noise that would go off if there was a problem with the monitor was the chime from the door, and the car battery was what kept this thing operational. And so the functionality was the same. It was warming an infant child to keep them from dropping body temperature, but how they came up with the solution really had to be specific around the geographical space and the skills and the accessibility to parts and equipment and knowledge was for that region. And I thought that was such a great example, because even if a team of innovators says, okay, we've come up with the solution to the problem, maybe, but is it sustainable? Is it implementable? And is it something that if it begins to get off track, that the people group for whom you have devised the solution can write if it's gone wrong?
I think this is part of the problem with the energy transition today. And you know that I often say as an engineer, it's never the technology, it's the psychology and the economics. And this is a prime example of that. My mind went right to, well, they're trying to bring those mortality rates up to US or Western levels like tomorrow. What did we do before incubators? Because there was a path along the way.
Yeah.
So don't try to go for 100% success tomorrow. What's an incremental path that would save one child or two children or something along the way, instead of, like you said, shipping them a $40,000 unit that works on AC, which may not even be available,
Right.
et cetera. But now, that's a great innovation to say, okay, let's use car parts and a 12-volt battery system. That makes a lot of sense. And I would say, what else can you do along the way to the ultimate goal of 100%? And and what they've done without thinking about it is say, okay, we're going to take a place where the infant mortality rate is high, but and start there, and that's a good place. You can see the most impact. We also need to look at where is the infant mortality rate low, and find out what are they doing properly.
Yes.
I guarantee it's not just incubators. And so there is probably a gang of things, a group of things to do that they could start implementing now while they figured out the very technical piece of the incubator. And then it sounds like they've stumbled onto a path to at least get them some semblance of one that's easy to maintain, et cetera, which is great. But I think we often approach a problem and we think, okay, we got to go from 0 to 100 tomorrow. But that's not what we did in Western society or wherever a infant mortality rate is low. We stumbled along the way doing different things.
If 40 minutes ago you would have said, what is the connection between introspection and innovation? I would have drawn a blank, but I'm finding this to be a very fascinating connection. So even with that analogy, when we're talking about behaviors or patterns within ourselves, that old thinking that we want to change, can we go from present condition to optimal, at the snap of a fingers, or do we have a little bit of stumbling along the way, learning from others. And I even liked what you said, study the place that has low infant mortality and what are they doing well. And so if you have a model behavior or a model mindset that you want to implement for yourself, what does that look like to study that person or that culture, that dynamic, so that you can begin to learn and stumble your way into it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly hanging out with people who have the attributes to which you aspire is absolutely a good way to do it. Now, we are not all blessed enough to be able to do that or have the wherewithal or resources to do that. But you can certainly look for people who have those tendencies more than people who don't. And I think that that's a really good first approach. And then, like you said, asking for help and saying, I've noticed that you have these reactions or this set of ways that you deal with stuff, and that's just really hard for me. Do you know why you're like that? The person may have, yeah, as a matter of fact, it was my combination of background and my mom taught me this and my teacher taught me this and this is where I've come to a conclusion, and now that I have that paradigm shift, this is the way I act, and they can maybe help you along your journey. However, everybody is different and everybody's a different place in the journey. And what you said is key. You cannot get to your full state of mental health or whatever it is you're trying to go for tomorrow. That's not the goal. The goal is to make progress towards that in whatever way that you can, given your resources and the time you're choosing to do that and all the other conditions in your life. But don't just stand still and don't just throw in the towel.
Sure. Well, and then also I would say, if you have someone in mind who models a life pattern, a lifestyle, an attitude that you very much want to emulate, maybe the way that you're going to manifest those behaviors is going to look different. Maybe yours is going to be full of car parts instead of all of the high-priced, gadgets and gizmos that we have access to in the United States. The end results may well be the same, that maybe you want to be a person deeply rooted in peace or joy, or you want to really have a more of a servant heart, or whatever it is that you're aspiring to. But your journey to get there is not going to look like that other person. And I think you absolutely can be innovative and maybe even have we talked about our inner circle, have that core team of people around you to say, this is where I find myself today. This is where I long to be. How do I get there? Help me think through some of these things. And that would be an interesting conversation.
And call me out on the actions and behaviors that I'm not even seeing in myself. And, and understand that it's a journey and it's going to take a while. But this is what I'm aspiring for, and I'm planning on working there. And even the ultimate goal is going to be different between two different people. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. You may aspire to peace so that you can go and do your mantra on the top of a hill somewhere. Or you may be the person who's aspiring for peace so that you can put yourself in very stressful situations and be able to survive.
Yes.
Right? So even the goal of why you want a certain thing can be totally different. So of course the outcome is going to be different as there are people in the world.
So if we are thinking around, that introspective need to look inward to maybe reshape some of our traditional thinking, which of course we've covered in other podcasts, but doing that from an innovative's perspective, what are some of those curious questions that we might be able to ask ourselves and our inner circle as we want to make that journey?
Well, I think the first question is, okay, what behavior am I trying to change and why? And why is this bad? Why is this not useful? Does it cause me fear? Does it cause me to go into a shame attack? Does it cause me to, to lash out at people? I mean, what's the reason? What's the motivation for the change? Because if you don't have a motivation to change, you're certainly not going to.
Yeah. And I would, before you go to the next one, I would say maybe a part A or a part B to that question really is, and is it bad? Because I think we sometimes, I will sometimes associate a behavior that I manifest as being a bad behavior.
Or a good behavior.
Or a good behavior, and is it really? or is it something that I'm holding in comparison to someone else or something else, and having a preconceived conclusion about, I'm stumbling over my words because my brain is tired and I've been doing way too much introspection today. But my point being, is it bad? So for my example in this one is, I take a very long time to process. I have to take a very long time to process. If you I'm not one for surprises. Don't surprise me. But if you drop some information and it takes me a really long time to process, I get frustrated. I want to get through it more quickly. I want to be resolved more quickly. And I see it as a bad thing, that I'm a slow processor, and it's a painful process for me to go through the mental exercises of getting myself to the point of stability. And I see it as a bad thing. But I'm sure there's others that maybe would look at that and say, well, it's not bad, it's just different, or it's the way that you handle it. And so it's also being aware of really what is the right perspective around what you're labeling as good or bad within your own intentions.
Sure, because there's a correlation between the length of time it takes you to make a decision or process something and the quality of that decision or the end product of that processing, to begin with, at the end. And so you're right, it's not good or bad, it's just different. Now, when you've got somebody who's a very fast processor with somebody who's a very slow processor, they can sometimes get frustrated with each other. But if they're both self-aware of that and they both tell each other, hey, I'm a slow processor who'd like to go faster. Well, guess what? I'm a fast processor who'd like to go slower. Let's meet in the middle, and the yin-yang of our processing together is going to give even a better result than either one could come up with, and probably a little quicker, right? It won't be as fast as I'd like, but it won't be as slow as you get frustrated with.
Right.
So again, you're exactly right. You don't say, okay, I need to change this behavior because the world has judged it bad, or I perceive it's bad, or I've judged myself to be bad. You say more of it, okay, look, I'm willing to accept this about myself, and if it's causing a problem with others, then let's discuss that before I just assume it's causing a problem with others along that journey. And so we're on 1A, 1B here, but I think that it's an important 1A, 1B because as we are judging ourselves, let's just say that I've got more than one defective character, one thing. Just pretend for a moment. So I'm going to be working maybe on my top 5, maybe 6 through 10. I'm not working on right now, and that's okay.
Yeah.
As long as it's not causing major problems in my life, so what? And we're not meant to fix everything by tomorrow, and that's the point.
Yeah. All right, so moving from 1A and 1B to number 2, I derailed you a little bit, but do you have anything that comes to mind after that?
Well, sure. I mean, how does this then interact with other people, both from a family, from a community, from an organization, from society standpoint, right? So basically it's just moving outward. How are things that I want to work on internally, are they good, bad, and what's my motivation to change them? And then how do I interact with others? And is that good and bad, and what's my motivation to change? And then how do we as an organization deal with the marketplace, or how do we as a team trying to solve a problem in the world, maybe a nonprofit, deal with society, right? And so I think just starting with inward and then moving outward.
Yeah, so there's that point at which you transition from that introspection to bringing the others in, that really turns or points the needle then over to innovation.
Exactly.
And could be personally changing in terms of how you respond and interact with others, but it definitely could be something that changes the course of yourself, your family, or your organization.
That's the goal.
Well, good conversation. All right. Introspection to innovation. I'll figure out some clever title. And we appreciate always you listening and participating. As always, your comments are welcome, whether you comment directly on the YouTube channel or you want to send us a note. You can do so at curiositynotjudgment.com. We'll wish you a good week, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.